What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm here with IMK's personal KTM Super Duke 1290. This is a 1300cc V-twin bike. That means we got big pistons in this thing. There's only two of them. We've got to stock everything except for the muffler. So we've got a stock header on this thing. We're gonna see what kind of gains we can get with stock everything on this bike. The bike actually makes 177 horsepower and over 100 foot-pounds of torque, along with the weight of 441 pounds. It makes it a pretty lethal combination. The torque on this thing is absolutely ravenous. So we'll go through this whole thing top to bottom, explain the before steps on, hey, this is what the bike feels like before. We'll go take it to the dyno, see what kind of gains we can get from the dyno, quantifiable stuff, and then go take GPS actually and go 60 through 130 and 100 through 150 to see exactly what we've gained, not just on the dyno, but on the street as well. So let's go ahead and get started with this thing.
All right, guys, I'm here with the 2022 KTM Super Duke. We're on our first ride here. I've been riding this thing for about 40 miles now. Amazing stuff. This bike rips, it shreds, even with no quick shifter. I'm just kind of doing the manual shifting stuff here. But man, the torque is for days and days and nights and months. I mean, there's so much torque in this bike, but it does feel a little toned down compared to its predecessor. Does feel a little bit turned down, like it's a little bit more tame. The old one wanted to kind of murder you, and that was kind of great. It gave you that Ducati feel. A lot of people are kind of polarized on that, and they'll either like, oh, I like the BMW because it's such a nice smooth and linear, it's like a scalpel, that thing, it's so smooth. But this thing's like a 15-pound sledgehammer with a 15-foot handle. I mean, it's hard to deal with, but when you hit something with it, you hit it right, man, it is a lot of fun. There's so much torque in this bike. Now that comes from, they're saying the 1290 Super Duke, which is actually a 1301cc motor. So they kind of fibbed over the name, or maybe they want to change it. Maybe they like the ring around 1290. But it is 1301 cc's from a V-twin. That's right. This is only 2 cylinders on this bike. Massive, massive slugs. The bike itself weighs 441 pounds wet, which is about 20 pounds less than the previous model from composite materials, carbon fiber, which, I mean, you can think 20 pounds is nothing. It is nothing on basically a car, but on a bike that only makes, 177 horsepower, that's a big deal. The power is just so ridiculous on this bike. So I have the MTC off, that's why it says traction control on there. But even so, like, if you wrap back on this thing, the front tire is hovering right now. Of course, you can't see it in the video, but as I'm holding back in this thing, the front tire is just levitating in 3rd gear. So if I try a 2nd gear hit, it's probably coming right off the ground, which I'll try here in a second. There's 2nd gear hit. Well, it's not really coming off the ground like it expected to, as like the old models did, for example. I have to preload it, and then it's barely hovering. I might have to clutch it up, but I mean, I shouldn't have to do that. There we go. 3rd gear comes up, 2nd gear is hesitant to come up, which is a little bit odd because it should come up easier in 2nd gear. Let's try that again. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so you have to play with it at a certain throttle, and I think that's due to the fueling on the bike, which we're going to fix here in a little bit when we get this thing on the dyno. So something new for this model, the 2020 Plus, is the semi-active suspension here, which has 3 settings. It's going to have the comfort, street, and sport. Right now I'm in street because I'm on the street, obviously, and I like to hoon around a little bit, so I like to play with it that way. So I will try comfort a little bit here, but the suspension, seat, the riding position for a Supermoto is extremely comfortable. I mean, as you expect from an upright. The only downside, of course, is going to be the wind just smashing in the face constantly when you're at freeway speeds or anything over 100 miles an hour, basically. So unlike a Ducati, this bike sounds like it, kind of like a Ducati with the V-twin. But this kind of is reminiscent of like the 1199 and 1299 sound, not the V4 sound. Whereas this makes its power all across the range. The 1199 and 1299 couldn't do anything below like 5,000 RPM. It was absolute garbage. And then it came on all of a sudden like a 2-stroke engine. All of a sudden the power just laid on thick, and then it just came out of nowhere. This is a very nice smooth power band all the way across. It does have that nice mid-range. Reminds me a lot of the V4 Street Fighter in the mid-range, of course. And I like the display and everything on this bike, actually. So it's not fancy. It's very, I mean, it is a TFT, so it's kind of cool. And it is orange, which are the KTM colors. It does give you everything you need right there on the screen. And it is a little bit laggy as far as when you see the RPM go up. But it does give you some great information, man. I mean, I wish other bikes did this where you have the oil temp right there. That's super important to me. Oil temp, you have the water temp, you have the ambient temp, you have, well, your odometer doesn't really matter, and actual gas gauge that isn't just a light that turns on all of a sudden at one point when you're riding, you're like, you know, 100 miles away from something, you're like, oh great, I got no gas, perfect. And also another thing about this bike that I really do like, it's not burning the hell out of me like the Ducatis do. So the $1199, $1299, anyone that's owned those bikes knows that you need like heat protection on your ass, your inner thighs, otherwise it just burns everything off. I mean, I don't think I had hair for the better part of a year from riding those bikes for a long time. But that's a story for either here nor there, or probably never actually. Let's just never talk about that again. But let's just put it this way, it's extremely hot around your legs and in your butt on the Ducatis, whereas this is just nice. I'm in 80 degrees or 82 degrees right now here. I'm not on fire. It's a nice, pleasant riding experience. The sound isn't too overwhelming. We got a stock system on here with just an SC slip, so nothing insane there. It's just a nice, fun bike to ride in the street. Now we're heading here to the top end stuff so I can really test this thing opening up. But just my overall riding impressions, this thing is a nice, sweet bike to ride, and for the price point of, I believe it's about $20,000. I think it's a little bit steep for this, but it is a great bike. And if you like KTM, it does have that unique look that's pretty much you like it or you hate it. I'm not super partial to it, but I know a lot of people who are. This is, like I said, IMK's personal bike. So he likes the bike, of course. He's done a bunch of little things to this that he's waiting to put more parts on here. I mean, he does these little things to the bike that he goes crazy for, like titanium bolts and little caps here and there. Like, he loves these things, which I think is super cool. So let's get over the top end stuff here and I'll get back with you guys. All right, I'm setting my dampening to sport. So let's see what this does here. And we're ready to go. Alright, let's see what this bike can do. So what's new about this bike technically is, or the 2020 Plus, I believe, they've made this chassis stiffer. So instead of it feeling so large around corners, now it's a little more exact. And there's definitely a lot of torque in this thing, man. All I have to do is keep this thing in low RPMs. It really does it well. What I'm noticing here is tipping is definitely jerky. It's hard to just put an exact amount of power in when I'm going on and off the turn here. The anchors are very good. I mean, we're talking these are Brembo. This is Brembo hardware on here. Oh yeah, pull up the tire right there. Get here low speed, let's see. On off throttle. It's a little jerky. Yeah, it's a little jerky. It's something I shouldn't have to be concentrating on. The power is brutal. I'm smacking the limiter a little bit here. So I'm going to keep the RPMs a little bit low and see if it can find its way with the torque, which it has plenty of. Oh yeah. Oh, she's a bruiser, man. Man, power, power, power. So much power, and the braking hardware is pretty decent, man, I gotta say. It's good power, but there is something to be said about it just not coming through on the power. It's great power, don't get me wrong, but it feels like there's something missing. It's something I'm sure we'll take care of here on the dyno. This feels like a fueling issue, which again, we have a stock pipe on this. so it can't be or a stock exhaust on here, so it can't be that. Oh yeah. Very nice. She performed very well. It's a lot of fun. More fun than a lot of bikes I've taken through that top end section there. But it's missing something. I'm concentrating too much on my throttle inputs because a little too much, and this thing has way too much torque. This thing will just pull right out of the corner, push right through the corner basically if I don't control the throttle. So it takes away from the experience a little bit. I got some stuff here. Some construction. So overall, I'd say this is a great bike, don't get me wrong, but there is something untapped here, which I hope we'll get on the dyno. Oh, my visor a little bit here. Which I hope we'll get on the dyno when we finally test this thing and unlock it. So right now, while I'm sitting here waiting, let's go ahead and check the stock 60 through 130 and see what you can do. All right, I'm here with the KTM Super Duke 60 through 130 stock. Let's get it. Stock 60 through 130. Let's go. So you guys saw it. 6.5, 60 through 130, which is pretty good for a stock bike, even against like an S1000 or R, which stock runs pretty damn slow, to be honest with you, because of that huge limitation it has with these huge flat spots on the bottom or the mid-range and the top end on the 23. So I'm pretty impressed with how it does stock with that 6.5. And you can see through the range there, while I'm shifting, you can see exactly the points I'm shifting. Even though I'm clutchless shifting, you can see on the graph, because it's not fast enough for it to be kind of seamless, you can see where I'm shifting. So if we improve the RPM on this and give it maybe 1,000 more, I don't think we'll have to shift one time more, which should give it some time, or, you know, should take away some time, actually. And I think there's going to be a lot of improvements here as far as the dyno goes. I'm kind of excited to take this thing over there right now and see what it can do. So let's go ahead and go over the factory impressions here. Overall, extremely comfortable bike. I still have it in sport right now. I'm honestly not telling a huge difference between sport and street. Maybe I need to go to comfort and check it out, but it's not like a huge noticeable difference. Maybe it's a little bit softer in street. I just went over a bump. Maybe it's a lot of it softer. The bump was like jolted me through my spine. But yeah, I do like the semi-active suspension. The lighter weight of the bike does make it feel, and the stiffer chassis, of course, does make it feel better through the turns. The Brembo anchors on this thing, pretty good, man. I mean, this is a good package, a good starter package here, but I'm telling you, this thing feels tame. We're gonna take this thing over to the dyno and see. Whoa, I misshifted big time there. We're gonna take this thing over to the dyno and see exactly what we can extract from this bike. I don't think we're gonna be pulling like the S1000, 50 wheel, 60 wheel horsepower to the mid-range of this thing. I think it's gonna be little gains, but if we take gains from fueling on torque and horsepower, I think this thing will be a brutal package, honestly. I don't like the tip-in. It's a little too jolty for me, so we'll see if we can correct that. Again, that's with fueling, we can correct that. We can't correct anything on the quick shifter because this one doesn't have a quick shifter, but if it does, we do have corrections for that as well. We even have coating for the exhaust valve to stay open. And overall, I'd say at the track, this bike is very decent. On the street, it's very decent. It's a very linear power band. Although when it does finally get to the limiter, I feel like it can keep pressing on. It feels like it's making power, then all of a sudden you're hitting the limiter. So I don't like that either. We should be able to push the limiter up a little bit in this thing to give it a wider power band. So let's go head over to the dyno now. Instead of me talking about it all the time, let's actually do it. Let's see those gains, and let's get this thing back on the street and see how it improves.
All right, we're back here at Lee's in San Diego working on Kay's 2022 KTM 1290 Super Duke R. She's got her all strapped down. We're getting ready to make some power runs and see what she does. right, we are wrapped up here with the Super Duke, and let's go ahead and check out those numbers. Look at those gains. So red we've got tune, blue we've got stock. You can see right off the bat, extended rev range, 1,000 more RPM right there. That's one of the tune features. Stock we are making, this is the top endish here. We're making 5-wheel horsepower, 4-wheel torque. Even at the peak here, we're making somewhere in the neighborhood of 8-wheel horsepower. And we're making 4-wheel torque. I mean, these don't sound like huge gains like in a car, for example. In the mid-range there, we're making about 5 and 5. These don't seem like they're huge gains, but on a motorcycle, it's huge. 5-wheel horsepower, 5-wheel torque, I mean, that is massive on a bike like this. And the bike's a lot smoother now. You can see we're getting gains across the entire RPM band. The RPM band's extended, so we have less shifts at the track and a wider power band. We've also messed with the quick shifter. It's faster if your bike has one. This one doesn't, but we do have that. You won't need any race box or anything like that. We have the exhaust valve wide open on this thing. Partial throttle tuning, wide open throttle tuning, ignition timing. We go through the litany of things on this. Even the cruise control speed limit is disabled now. So there's a lot of cool things that customers ask for. They try and push to us through feedback, and we try to push those into the tuning itself. And you can see bone stock exhaust. The only thing we've got here is an ST slip, and even still has the exhaust valve lines on it. Everything's still there. No errors. No MTC crazy stuff, runs just fine, runs perfect as you can see, otherwise it would have just went into limp. So these are awesome gains. Let's see quantifiably what this is when we ride this thing and see if it improves that 60 through 130.
All right, back on the road with this 1290 Super Duke, and man, this bike is completely changed. I don't even, it's hard to even describe. Me, listen to this. Now it gets pops and bangs. Listen to that. Wasn't doing that before. And the power is absolutely brutal. This reminds me of a V4 Street Fighter with our Stage 2 setup, except it's more brutal. It has more power, there's more mid-range, which I didn't think was possible. In fact, we had a couple files to try on the bike. One of them even had more mid-range than this, and I said, no, it's too much. Dial it back. I'm not even kidding. Dial the mid-range back. This is perfect the way it sits, and even now it's, I mean, let's see here. I mean, check that out. I'll probably not do that in the traffic, but it picks up the tire right off the bat, whereas before it was such a struggle. Now it's every single gear. Here we go. First, tire up, second gear. Here we go. Tire up, third gear. Oh, let's go to third gear. Third gear, let me see. Nope. The tire's hovering, which is pretty cool. Before it wasn't even attempting to do that, and we got so many pops now. I didn't change the exhaust. It's the same exact exhaust we had before. It's just now we're finally got the correct fueling. We got the exhaust valve open. It sounds amazing. Again, this is a stock system with just an SC slip on it. That's all this is, and it hasn't changed. I haven't done anything to this bike except flash it. That's it. We're using the same fuel, same everything. This bike is a world different. I don't even know how to describe it. I know the dyno said 5-wheel horsepower more. Went from 166 to 171. But man, that 5-wheel horsepower and the torque, I mean, we're well over 100-wheel torque here. That's what's making this thing absolutely nuts. The torque is brutal. If you like that feeling of the V4 Street Fighter with the tuning, and it's just like this rip your face off torque in the mid-range, this is it too, man. It is awesome. And now we've also got the extended rev range here. Get off the light, I'll show you guys. It goes to like 11,000 RPM now at this point. Oh man, so much power. Okay, here we go. Extended rev range. There we go, see it? Sorry about the head shake there, I was holding it incorrectly. I also haven't checked the damper or anything like that, so let's see that. I'll smack it out to 11,000 one more time here so you guys can see. Man, that is, well, that's a cop. Let's make sure he doesn't catch up. It is brutal how much faster this bike is. It's so changed, and that is just, like I said, 5-wheel horsepower and 5-wheel torque in a lot of spots on this. Not all spots, but a lot of spots, and the change is huge. Even we had that problem with the tire barking on engine braking. This is completely reasonable engine braking now. It's not going insane with jerking the bike around, throwing you over the handlebars, the engine braking. Now it seems like it's a lot more well-behaved, a lot more well-mannered, especially when you're just tipping in, just cruising. It's not as jerky anymore. You know, when I first got this bike off the dyno and I was trying to actually test it out, I took a video of my reaction to hitting the throttle. I thought, oh, you know, it'll be a little bit different, but man, it almost laid me on my back. All right, first time on the bike here. Let's see if we got more power than we did before. Holy God! Holy hell! That was just first gear, and I barely touched it, like 20% or something like that. All right, second gear. Oh my God! Whoa! And we got some pops. It was a complete shock. The bike is completely changed. There's so much more on this bike now, and riding it is so comfy, even at slow speeds. And yes, I'll take back what I said where I didn't notice the difference between the suspension settings. I notice it now. We've got a comfort on it right now. Comfort and sport, I'm noticing a change. If I go from comfort to street to sport, I'm not noticing much. But comfort to sport, yeah, comfort to sport, I definitely notice a change. It's nice and smooth. I went over some crazy bumps and it really was soaking them up very well. So I'll put it into sport here when we get up to the high speed stuff, so I can really feel the sport setting on this, and then put it back to comfort as soon as I'm done up there, and then ride it all the way back. That's another great thing with this bike. All right, we made it over here to the top speed stuff. Loving the feeling of this bike right now. The sound and everything is such a nice experience. The engine braking is much better, not as jerky anymore. Tip in is better. It's still jerky, but I mean, we're talking over 100 foot-pounds of torque on this bike, so it's best probably, unless you're a track pro or something like that, to keep it in a low RPM and just let the torque do the work for you, because at a low RPM you have more throttle control for tip-in. And yeah, the stiffer frame, yep, it really does come through on this bike. Tip-in is good. The power coming out of turns is atrocious, like absolutely scary. So much torque. It doesn't matter what RPM you're in, you just tap into it. Tip in here at low speed stuff, a little bit jerky, but much better than before. Like I'm saying, keep it at low RPM, come into it. Not bad at all. Keep it at low RPM here to this turn, and then open her up. Oh yeah, that is nice. Let's see what she's got. Oh, she's got a bit. She's got quite a bit. Come on. Oh yeah. Getting loose, getting loose. Man. With the sound of this bike too, keeping it at low RPM again. I think low RPM is it, guys. Don't try to wind this thing out through the turns. This has so much torque now with the Flash. Just let the torque do the work. Oh man. Oh man. It picks up the tire right away. That's so awesome. So for those of you, I'd say that like the Ducati. Oh man, picked it up coming out of the turn. So for those of you that like the Ducati feeling of, hey, this bike has murderous intent towards me, I would say this is definitely a great option. I mean, it has more than the Ducati does. Picks the tire right up, man. This has a lot more than the Ducati does in the mid-range. I mean, it's so different. But it has that feeling that wants to murder you, and like I said before, that's a feeling either people love or hate. I tend to love it, because something that wants to murder me and I'm barely taming it, I love that, man. That's what makes my heart pump. So let's go ahead and see what this bike did. 60 through 130 post Flash. Okay, time for after 60 through 130 post flash. Let's see what she does. So you guys saw it right there, 6.2. That is 0.3 of a second faster, 60 through 130. Now, if I really got some seat time in this bike and not just hit it one time, because I was fighting the throttle, let's say, I'd say it was a third throttle, and that tire was just pogoing. I was hovering that thing on the road, basically. So, more seat time, I could dive this thing into fives, but that 0.3 of a second, that's a lot right there, honestly. And with how much power this thing has and having to check myself on the throttle every moment, basically, that's awesome. And we are also looking at the 60 through 130. You can see the shifting changed. You can see where I shift, that's the little notches right there, right? On the acceleration where it has that arc like that, you can see the little shifts. It's less shifts, 60 through 130, because of that extended RPM range. It helps. And we also recorded 100 through 150, half a second faster. Now that's me not playing with the throttle anymore. I'm balls deep in this thing, and it gave me a half a second more, 100 through 150. That's a big change, guys. That's huge, especially on a naked that has an arrow or the arrow of a garage door. That's impressive. Super impressive stuff. So I'm really impressed with this bike. I'm still like reminiscing about the top end stuff. Man, this bike is a blast. It has me re-looking at this thing and going, I mean, because I'm not a big fan of the looks myself, but man, I'm a huge fan of this motor and how this bike actually performs. I mean, it's a blast, honestly. At a short track for like around here in Southern California, you got Chuckwalla, for example. It's a really slow and technical track, but this bike would be a blast on that track. I mean, an absolute thrill. I love how this bike rides now, and with the pops and everything, it gives you a complete experience. I mean, listen to this thing. That sounds great. And if you don't like that, cool, leave the stock exhaust on. I'll recommend to everyone that you leave the stock header on this thing. And if you want to put the slip on like Kay did and just put that SC slip on there, which I actually like the sound of it. Typically I'm not a huge SC fan, honestly, but on this bike, like cruising right now, I can't hear it. That's why I look for an exhaust. If I can't hear it while I'm cruising, but when I nail it, there it is. That's what I look for, an exhaust. I like to hear it, but sometimes I don't want to hear it. I don't want something droning in my ear every 5 seconds. So I think this is a nice compromise. With the header, typically you gain mid-range. You don't need it on mid-range on this bike. Like I said, I had to tone the bike down in the mid-range just to make sure this thing was rideable, basically. I mean, even right now, if I just twist it and I'm not laying on the tank, you saw it, first gear, second gear, third gear, it's just going up in the air. This bike is a blast. So let's recap everything we get. Damn, this thing really moves now. Let's recap everything we get from the Stage 1 Flash on this bike. First of all, you just get a wheelie machine. There's so much power, it's ridiculous. I know the dyno is saying one thing, but man, feeling this bike, you could have told me, oh, it gained 10 wheel horsepower, 10 wheel torque. I would have been like, yeah, it probably did. So, huge difference there. Of course, we're getting the pops in the bangs now. If you have, we keep that exhaust valve open on here. We get smoother tip in. We get red lights. I mean, those don't come with the Flash, but they're coming with this video apparently. But we get the extended RPM limiter, of course, which means we're going to be over 11,000 RPM when it finally calls it quits, which expands the power band and also reduces shifting at the track, and we saw that actually helped the 60 through 130, for example. So, I mean, we're talking a lot of changes here. The minimum cruise control speed reduced. Use the clutch here for a second. Oh, that's such a good sound now. Oh, man. Reducing that cruise control limit speed, getting rid of all the governors and limiters on this thing. it's just an overall so much better bike. The engine braking, because the fueling is much better, is no longer throwing you over the handlebars. I do feel there should be some kind of setting where it reduces or improves the engine braking. It's not on this bike. You see it on like a BMW, for example, but I do think the engine braking is still a little too much. You can get used to it, but it's still too much in my opinion. But it's much better than stock. The power you get on this bike, especially for the mid-range, I think stock header is fine. If you want to put like a muffler on there, go ahead and do that. But I think the stock header is perfectly fine for this bike. There is no reason. In fact, if you're on the fence, spend the money on the Flash, do that first, and then tell me it needs an exhaust. This thing is just wheeling. If I just nail it in third, it'll start picking up the tire in third gear in the mid-range. The engine of this thing is very impressive. I'd rather have this over a V4 Street Fighter engine, to be honest with you. And this is only a couple slugs on here. Massive slugs, the 1200 or 1301 cc actually. So I think that's going to do it here. I'm just going to ride this thing while I can, then I got to take this thing back to K, but I'm going to enjoy this thing. And man, this is such a nice experience now to ride. I can just do this all day. Just the mid-range grunt, just pulling back in the throttle and just having it rip your face off while you're going through the gears. It is such a pleasant experience, honestly. So I think that's what I'm going to call it today, and I'll see you guys in the next ride.